This isn't where the story ends. This is where it begins again. Because real power doesn't beg for attention. It withstands. And Leon? He's just getting warmed up. Let me paint you a picture. Evelyn Brooks didn't walk into the terminal at Westlake Regional. She glided, slow, steady, wrapped in the kind of elegance that softens a room before a single word is spoken. Even from across the gate, you could feel it. This was a woman who'd seen life from both mountain tops and valleys. She'd raised 3 children, buried the love of her life, fought off cancer twice, and still wore her mother's pearls like armor. At 78, with a back that curved like an old oak under decades of wind, but a soul still sharp enough to split glass, she wasn't looking for attention. But, oh, how she deserved it. The air inside Gate C-14 smelled like burned espresso, recycled ambition, and hurry up and wait. Kids cried, laptops balanced on fast food wrappers, and one gate agent with all the warmth of a granite countertop. Evelyn's cane tapped along the tile like a drumbeat, calm, confident, unwavering. That cane wasn't for sympathy, it was for balance. Silver-handled, initials engraved, E.B. Evelyn Brooks. Not that Tessa, the flight attendant with a jawline sharper than her people skills, noticed. Blonde, early 30s, jacket cinched so tight it looked like it was holding its breath. She didn't see the initials, or the history. Evelyn had one goal: fly to Kingsport, stroll unannounced into her son's executive suite, and remind him, title or not, a grown man still needs to hug his mama on her birthday. What he didn't know was that she also planned to show up at his company's gala that night. Quiet, proud, front row, let the boardroom whisper about the woman who raised the man they now call Sir. First-class ticket in hand. Yes, first class. Evelyn approached the priority line. No fuss, no fluster. Just the quiet confidence of a woman who's earned every damn mile she's traveled. A young white couple smiled at her when her glove slipped from her lap. The man didn't hesitate, bent down, picked it up. "Thank you, darling," she said, giving him a nod that only a black matriarch can give, part blessing, part challenge. Then the voice came, cold, clipped, rehearsed. "Pre-boarding hasn't started. Please step aside." It was Tessa, all lipstick, no warmth. Evelyn exhaled, ticket steady in hand like a document signed by time itself. "I'm in first class, dear. I just need a little assistance down the jet bridge." Tessa didn't even look up. Unless you're active military or platinum elite, you're not priority. Flat. Final. Then, under her breath, but not too quiet, she said it. "You people always try this." It hit like a bucket of cold water to the soul. Time slowed. But Evelyn? She didn't flinch, didn't argue. She simply tilted her head and said, "Excuse me?" Tessa sighed, dismissive. "I'm not a mobility assistant. I'm a flight attendant. Go wait over there." And there it was. Not just rejection, reduction. The kind of tone folks reserve for gum stuck to shoes or a barking dog on a quiet street. Behind Evelyn, the young couple looked stricken. The husband opened his mouth, ready to say something, but Evelyn lifted her hand gently, not to silence him in fear, but in grace. This wasn't the moment, not yet. She stepped aside. But here's the thing about a woman like Evelyn Brooks. She didn't crumble, she didn't stew. She stood, back as tall as it would go, eyes ahead, fingers resting atop that silver cane like it was a scepter. She stood like a storm was coming and she already knew where the lightning would land. Tessa, meanwhile, returned to her desk like nothing had happened, like she hadn't tried to shrink a whole life into a seat number. But this wasn't the end. Not even close. You know that feeling when the air shifts, when silence starts speaking? That's what happened at gate C-14 when Evelyn didn't take a seat. There's a stillness that comes right before grace meets insult, and people feel it. Even the toddlers went quiet. Phones were still raised, fingers still swiping through endless feeds. But don't be fooled. Eyes were watching. And Evelyn? She didn't ask for attention, but she had it now. But don't let the casual scrolling and fake yawns fool you. Every eye was watching. Every ear tuned in like the gate itself had taken a breath. The whispers began, low and uncertain, like wind curling under a storm cloud. She didn't even check her ticket. A teenage girl murmured to her little brother, her voice wide with disbelief. A man in his 40s wearing a Fox Hill Falcons baseball cap shook his head like he'd just seen someone slap their grandmother. He muttered something and pulled out his phone, thumbs moving fast. Not for fun, but like he was logging evidence for the court of public opinion. And Evelyn? She didn't crumble. She stood like a statue carved from a lifetime of earned dignity. She wasn't asking for help. She wasn't begging for courtesy. But if you looked close, really looked, you'd see it. Her left hand wrapped tightly around that cane, knuckles white. Not from fear, but from holding back the kind of heat that generations before her called righteous fire. Her eyes drifted, slow and sharp, toward the check-in counter. Not pleading, just waiting. Waiting for the woman behind it to wake up and do the right thing. But Tessa? She was too busy putting on a whole new performance. Now she was smiling, flipping her hair, voice sugary as she greeted two white businessmen in crisp navy suits like they were dignitaries returning from war. She even leaned down to grab one of their carry-ons and walk them personally to the jet bridge. Funny how her legs worked just fine when the briefcases had logos on them. Then, right on cue, the side door clicked. In stepped someone new. Officer Janelle Ruiz didn't float. She marched. Mid-30s, uniform sharp as her stare, not a trace of nonsense anywhere in her walk. She didn't need a name tag. Her presence was the authority. And the second she saw Evelyn, everything changed. Concern, recognition, and something deeper, a quiet fury, the kind that stirs when you realize someone like your auntie just got played in public. She didn't hesitate. She moved right toward Evelyn and asked gently, "Ma'am, are you okay?" Already reaching out with the kind of compassion they don't teach in training manuals, the kind you're born with. But before Evelyn could even part her lips, there came Tessa. Again. Louder this time, defensive, the edge in her voice sharper than ever. "She's just confused," Tessa snapped. "I already told her she can't pre-board." Evelyn stood calm as ever. Then she spoke, eyes never leaving Janelle. "But Janelle," she said softly. Janelle stopped mid-step and turned toward Tessa, voice like velvet dipped in steel. "She's flying first class." Tessa rolled her eyes so hard they nearly hit the back of her skull. "She said she was," she muttered. That's when the young woman from the couple stepped forward, the one who'd smiled when Evelyn dropped her glove. Her voice rang out, clear as church bells on a bright morning. "I saw her ticket," she said. "You didn't even look at it. You just dismissed her." The gate went silent. Janelle blinked once, then turned to Evelyn, her whole posture shifting, back straighter, eyes sharper, tone laced with something protective and powerful. She took Evelyn's hand, held it like it was fragile and sacred, and looked at the boarding pass. Then her jaw set. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice steady, low. "You should have been escorted down 5 minutes ago. I'll call for someone right now." But Evelyn cut in, her tone both warm and unshakable. "No need. I can walk, if someone will just walk with me." That pause. It was holy. Tessa scoffed. The kind of bitter noise someone makes when they're still clinging to pride they haven't earned, and turned away like she was the one offended. But Janelle didn't flinch. Her jaw was tight, her chest rising with slow, controlled breaths. You could see it, the war inside her, between duty and the burning urge to call it like it was. And the crowd? They felt it too, because Evelyn had just shown them something, not with shouting, not with shame, but with presence, the difference between grace and permission. She wasn't asking to be treated like a queen. She was demanding to be treated like a human being. This was the moment before the tide turned. The fuse had been lit, and what came next would rock this airport from floor to ceiling. Inside that plane, everything looked polished, leather seats gleaming, overhead bins clicking shut like metronomes. Warm lighting wrapped the first-class cabin in calm. But don't be fooled. That peace was just the calm before the next storm. Tessa moved through the first-class cabin like nothing had happened, gliding with the elegance of a wind-up mannequin in heels, convinced the show was over. What she didn't know was Act 2 had just begun, and this time it was personal. She hummed to herself smugly, adjusting the glasses on her tray, grinning like someone who thought they'd gotten away with something. If denial had a face, it was hers. All poise, all polish, and not a drop of self-awareness. Then the cabin door opened, and in stepped Evelyn Brooks, still walking, still proud. But this time, her arm was linked with someone who saw her. Janelle Ruiz didn't trail behind her like staff. She walked beside her, shoulder to shoulder, like an equal, like family. And that single image said more than a dozen press releases ever could. Heads turned. A businessman froze mid-email. A young white woman in row 2 nudged her husband and whispered, "That's the woman from the gate." A black gentleman in a navy suit, silver cufflinks gleaming, maybe late 60s, rose immediately, not out of obligation but reverence. "Ma'am," he said softly, "please, take my seat." Evelyn offered him that same calm smile, hand lifting gently. "No, sweetheart, I've got mine. But thank you." He nodded with quiet respect and stepped aside, watching her make her way, slow and sure, to seat 1A. Front row, where she belonged. And when she lowered herself into that seat, shoulders square, posture unshaken, it wasn't just about comfort. She was claiming her place, a place she had earned. Meanwhile, the first officer, mid-step toward the galley, caught sight of her. He paused like someone had just drawn a line across the aisle. He leaned in, low and discreet. "Ma'am, I saw what happened out there. If you'd like to file a report—" Evelyn didn't even blink. "I'm fine," she said calmly. Then, after a pause, a glint in her eye, playful but powerful. "But I think you should call Leon." His brows lifted. "Wait, Leon? As in—" She nodded once. That was all. And it landed like a ripple dropped into still water, subtle at first but destined to reach every corner of the plane. The officer didn't ask another question. He just turned, slowly, as if walking into a whole new flight. Back in the galley, Tessa was in rare form. Clanging trays, rolling her eyes, venting with the kind of unearned confidence only ignorance can breed. She's just some old lady looking for special treatment, she scoffed. "I don't care who she thinks she is." The other attendant blinked, visibly uncomfortable. But Tessa didn't notice. She was too busy enjoying the sound of her own assumptions. Unfortunately for her, she wasn't the only one listening. The first officer entered the cockpit like a man carrying a storm in his chest. The captain, mid-50s, composed, flipping through flight logs, looked up slowly. "You're going to want to hear this," the officer said. And in that instant, something shifted. Not the altitude, not the engines, but the air itself. Something had changed. The lighting felt colder, the mood heavier, because now the crew knew exactly who was sitting in Seat 1A, and the reckoning had already begun. It started not with shouting, but with a knock, a clean, deliberate tap-tap on the galley door, not a request but a declaration. Tessa, still floating in her bubble of denial, answered with that frozen, polished smile, the one straight out of training manuals, wide, polite, hollow, but standing there was the captain, and he wasn't smiling. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't step inside. He just met her eyes, steady, unflinching, and delivered 6 words that cut through the cabin like a blade. "We have a problem. A big one." Tessa blinked, confused. "Okay, what kind of problem?" "The passenger in seat 1A, he said slowly, each word deliberate, "is Evelyn Brooks." Blank stare. "Okay, who?" His eyes didn't move. "Evelyn Brooks is Leon Brooks' mother." And just like that, the floor fell out. Her fake smile, gone. Her blood, drained. Her world, shaken. "You know," he continued, eyes narrowed, "Leon Brooks, the founder of this airline, the man whose name is on our checks." The color vanished from Tessa's face like it had been washed away. The storm she didn't see coming, it was already overhead. Tessa Monroe stood frozen in the narrow galley, her face draining of color faster than she could comprehend. Her lips parted, but no words came, only a faint, breathless whimper, like the wind being knocked out of pride. "She's flying incognito," the captain said, his arms crossed like he was anchoring the very weight of the moment. "Didn't want a scene, didn't want a fuss, but thanks to you, we've got both." He let the silence sit, heavy and deliberate. Half the passengers saw what happened at that gate, and several of them, they filmed it. Tessa's throat went dry. She swallowed, but it didn't help. I didn't know." The captain didn't blink. "No, you didn't ask. That's the difference." The words landed like stones in a still lake. No need to shout. The truth carried enough force on its own. Tessa tried again, desperate to backpedal. "I thought she was just what?" The captain snapped, his voice like a crack of thunder in the quiet cabin. "An inconvenience? Another old lady trying to board early?" He took a slow step closer, voice dropping again, steady but unmistakably sharp. "She had a first-class ticket, and you treated her like she was sneaking into a country club kitchen." Tessa opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. The space around them felt smaller, like the oxygen itself was judging her. "You need to apologize," the captain said, "and you'd better hope she accepts it." She didn't walk toward the aisle. She stumbled. Her hands trembled. Sweat bloomed along her spine, soaking into her uniform in dark patches. The posture she'd worn like armor earlier, chin up, shoulders back, had collapsed. 2 inches shorter now, maybe more. Each step down that aisle was a sentence served. The heel of her polished shoes tapped softly on the carpet, but to her they sounded like judgment in motion. click, 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 count down to confrontation. She pasted on the smile, wide, plastic, brittle at the edges, the one they teach you during orientation, the one that's supposed to smooth over rough moments. But this time, it didn't fit. It trembled at the corners. It looked more like fear than hospitality, and there, in seat 1A, sat Evelyn Brooks, upright, poised, tea in hand, eyes gazing calmly out the window, her reflection staring back at her from the sky beyond. She didn't acknowledge Tessa's approach. She didn't have to. Power, when real, doesn't chase attention. It commands it. Evelyn looked like a woman who had made peace with the world long ago and wasn't about to be disturbed by anything less than truth. Not anger, not apology, not even a spectacle. She didn't look furious. That would have been too simple. She looked complete, like someone who had already weighed Tessa's entire character and found it lacking. Tessa cleared her throat. "Ma'am." Her voice cracked under the weight of forced sweetness. "I just wanted to apologize if there was any misunderstanding earlier at the gate." Evelyn didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe louder. She didn't even glance in Tessa's direction. Tessa's smile twitched. Her hands fidgeted, unsure of where to rest. She clasped them in front of her, then behind, then back again. I had no idea who you were." The cabin, already still, seemed to draw quieter. Even the humming of the engine softened, like the plane itself was waiting for Evelyn's response. Finally, Evelyn turned her head, slow, smooth, deliberate, not for drama, but for emphasis. Her gaze met Tessa's, cool and clear. Her voice, when it came, was steady as stone, but soft enough to shatter delusion. "You'd have helped me," she said, "if I had walked in with a title, if I had a bodyguard by my side, if someone whispered in your ear who I was." Her eyes narrowed, not with hatred, but with deep, knowing disappointment. "But all you saw was a black woman with a cane." Tessa's mouth fell open slightly, the edges of her confidence unraveling. Still, she said nothing, because what could she say to that kind of truth? Evelyn wasn't finished. "And in your mind," she continued, "that meant I didn't belong in this seat, didn't deserve your help, didn't even deserve your time." The stillness in the cabin deepened. You could have heard the gentle snap of a seatbelt 2 rows back. "I didn't mean it like that," Tessa whispered, her voice nearly invisible. Evelyn raised a single eyebrow. "Oh," she said coolly, "but you did mean it. You meant every word, every gesture, and that's exactly why it matters." The woman in seat 1B leaned forward, arms crossed, eyes locked on Tessa with simmering fury. "We all saw it," she said, voice low but strong. "You ignored her. You dismissed her. You looked through her." Tessa's shoulders slumped. Her voice shrank even more. I could lose my job." For the first time, Evelyn's face softened, not in sympathy, but in recognition. She looked at Tessa the way a mother might look at a child who just touched a hot stove despite every warning. "Then maybe," she said gently, "you'll think twice next time." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Maybe you'll choose to see people before deciding who matters." And with that, she turned back to the window, one hand lifting the teacup to her lips, the other resting lightly on her lap. The conversation, as far as she was concerned, was over. Tessa stood there for a few seconds longer, forgotten, exposed, unraveling, and the cabin, it didn't clap, didn't cheer, didn't boo, it simply watched. Because some moments don't need noise to echo, some truths are so full, so undeniable they speak for themselves. And Evelyn Brooks? She had just spoken volumes without raising her voice. "Maybe now," Evelyn Brooks said softly, "you'll think twice before deciding who matters." Then, silence. Not the awkward kind, the real kind, the kind that falls like snow in a cathedral. Even the engines seemed to hush, as if the entire plane paused in reverence. Tessa Monroe stood in the aisle, suspended in her own regret. No defense, no witty comeback, no denial strong enough to break the silence now folding around her like consequence. She had been seen, fully, finally, and not for who she pretended to be, but for what she'd done. Evelyn, without another word, turned her gaze back to the clouds and lifted her teacup once more. Still composed, still majestic, still holding court, without raising her voice or lifting her chin. Because justice doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes in a whisper, and lands harder than any shout. By the time Flight 739 touched down in Kingsport, the turbulence wasn't overhead. It was online. The wheels hadn't even cooled on the tarmac before the internet turned Gate C-14 into the most talked-about place in America. Not because of a celebrity, not because of scandal, but because of truth, caught on camera, shared in seconds, and impossible to ignore. 2 videos. That's all it took. The first was grainy, but the audio was loud and clear. Tessa, standing stiff at the gate, brushing Evelyn off with a casual flick of her hand, not even glancing at the ticket offered. No warmth, no apology. Just that familiar cocktail of impatience and superiority. Like Evelyn had dared to exist in the wrong place at the wrong time. The second clip hit different. It was filmed mid-air. Row 1B. Steady hands. Crystal audio. It captured Tessa's attempt at an apology. Trembling voice, plastic smile. It captured Evelyn's quiet reply, her calm rejection of the performative regret, and it captured the cabin's reaction. The breathless hush, the still bodies, the stunned realization that something real had just unfolded at 40,000 feet. And then came the hashtags. Like sparks on dry grass, they lit up every corner of the internet. Respect or elders, CEO's mom, she, Oz Evelyn, first class grace. It wasn't just Twitter. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn lit up. Stitch after stitch. Commentary layered over commentary. Dramatic piano music. Voiceovers. Frame by frame breakdowns like it was courtroom footage. And every clip, every edit, every post pointed back to the same truth. They hadn't just witnessed an incident. They'd witnessed a statement. And right at the center of it all, woven through every retweet, every caption, was a name people couldn't stop typing. Leon Brooks, CEO of Meridian Sky, one of the few black executives at the helm of a national airline, a man known for his privacy, his precision, and his principles. And now, whether he liked it or not, he was trending for something personal. Very personal. Airline CEO's mother denied board and help. Internet erupts. She raised him. Now she's raising standards. From Seat 1A to viral icon, Evelyn Brooks' silence speaks volumes. At Kingsport International, cameras were already gathering before the aircraft even reached the gate. Local news crews jockeyed for space with national outlets. Independent creators held up handheld gimbals and ring lights clipped to their phones. Reporters whispered into their microphones, hushed and urgent, "She's on that plane. She lands any minute. Get ready." But when the cabin doors finally opened, it wasn't a circus. It was a procession. 3 security personnel, sharp suits, calm faces, stood by the jet bridge. They didn't move with the urgency of emergency, but the precision of purpose. They weren't there to escort Evelyn like a suspect. They were there to protect her, like the treasure she had become. Because now, the world didn't just see her, the world knew her. And Evelyn? She stepped off the plane with the same grace she boarded it with, shoulders back, chin level, cane tapping rhythmically like a metronome reminding time to respect its elders. She didn't wave. She didn't acknowledge the cameras. She didn't smile for the crowd. She simply walked, poised, silent, untouchable. The airport buzzed behind layers of glass. Reporters leaned in. Phones rose like a field of flowers pointed to the sun. But she kept moving. No interview, no comment, no performance, because Evelyn Brooks didn't need to speak. Her presence had already gone viral. Inside the press hall, the air was electric, but not loud, tense, focused. The kind of anticipation that fills a room just before history steps in. Cameras line the back wall, microphones angled like questions waiting to be answered. Behind the podium, the backdrop was minimal, a clean white banner with the deep blue Meridian Sky logo. No slogans, no distractions, because no one needed help understanding the gravity of what was about to be said. This wasn't just a press conference, this was a reckoning, and when Leon Brooks stepped out onto the stage, the room stopped breathing. He didn't speak right away. He didn't clear his throat or tap the mic. He just stood there, tall, still, the weight of both son and CEO stitched into every thread of his charcoal gray suit. His face was carved in quiet anger. His eyes carried the storm. He looked across the sea of reporters, then down at the podium. And when he spoke, his voice didn't tremble, it commanded. "My mother," he said, "didn't tell anyone who she was, because she wanted to be treated like every other passenger." He paused, not for effect, but for truth, and it landed hard. That was the point. A silence followed, the kind of silence people remember, the kind that makes them remember. And what happened to her, he continued, voice low and measured, is exactly why we have so much work left to do. You could feel it, the silence growing heavier by the second. Not a cough, not a whisper, not even the shuffle of a notepad. Leon Brooks stood at the podium, the fire beneath his composed voice radiating out like a quiet storm. He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. His restraint was the statement. Controlled fury lived behind his eyes, not new, but well-aged, the kind that comes from years of knowing that one mistake, one dismissal, one unchecked moment can define an entire system. Then, his voice cut through the stillness. "Tessa Monroe is no longer employed by our airline." Gasps rippled across the room like shock waves. Pens froze. Phones lifted higher. The flash of a dozen cameras lit up the stage. But Leon wasn't finished. "This isn't about one employee," he said firmly. "This is about all of us. It's about how we train, how we listen, and how fast we judge people who don't look, sound, or move like we expect them to." He looked straight into the cameras, not past them, not through them, into them, as if challenging every viewer to sit with their own reflection. This is about what kind of company we are, and what kind of company we refuse to be. Behind him, she stood, Evelyn Brooks, not speaking, not moving, wearing a deep burgundy coat, a pearl pin at her collar catching the light like a constellation. Her expression didn't shift. Her posture didn't bend. She didn't need to say a word. She had already said enough, not with her voice, but with her presence. She stood like a monument, not to pain, but to power, to resilience, to grace. She wasn't just a mother now. She was a mirror, a measure, a reminder. And the headlines? They wrote themselves. CEO dismantles discrimination in one speech from boarding gate to boardroom. Evelyn Brooks inspires policy reform. Respect is not a perk, it's a right. But Evelyn remained silent, because when the world finally listens, truly listens, you don't need to shout. You just stand and let them hear the echo of everything they once ignored. 1 week later, Meridian Sky didn't release a press statement. They didn't hold another conference. Instead, they released a story, a 5-minute short film, titled Legacy in Seat 1A. From the moment it went live, the internet stopped scrolling. It opened in grainy black and white. No music, just a still photograph. Young Evelyn, age 24, standing in front of a chalkboard filled with dense equations and diagrams. Her hair natural, blazer oversized, expression unreadable but unmistakably fierce. A caption faded in beneath the image. The first black woman to graduate from her aeronautical engineering program, 1968. Then the screen faded into color. Clips rolled. Evelyn arm in arm with civil rights leaders, holding protest signs in the rain, helping organize in living rooms turned strategy rooms. Her voice narrated over it all, low and honest, without performance. I wasn't trying to make headlines. I was trying to make a way. More photos followed. Evelyn holding baby Leon, his fist curled around her necklace. Then, later, Beeman at his college graduation, standing proudly behind him as he cut the ribbon at his first hangar, always one step behind, always the anchor behind the applause. And finally, Evelyn now, sitting in seat 1A. Different flight, different moment, but everything had changed. This time the staff greeted her with warmth, not because someone had whispered her identity, but because her name carried meaning, not as Leon's mom, but as Evelyn Brooks. The video didn't end with applause. It ended with a black screen. White letters, simple and still. Respect should never require a name tag. And for a moment, the internet stood still again, not because she was famous, not because her son ran a company, but because the world had seen something true. Something that stripped away the layers of excuse and revealed what dignity looks like when no one thinks you're watching. Evelyn never dragged Tessa online, never demanded revenge, never posted a rant, never raised her voice. She just stood, held her truth, and let the world do the watching. Because sometimes the most powerful statement is how you refuse to let something slide. Evelyn Brooks never asked to be a symbol, but sometimes history taps you on the shoulder, not because of who you know, but because of what you stand for when it's easier to sit down. Now, when people hear her name, they don't just think first class. They think first of her kind. First to rise without roaring. First to remind us what grace under fire really looks like. And that is a legacy worth remembering.